Good evening. Welcome to Truth Seekers. My name is Mike Fishkin. Seated next to me is Jay Saylor. It is March 21st, 2009, Saturday night. So if you're watching this Saturday night, March 21st, you can call us if you like. The phone numbers are up there. We, as usual, talk about evidence for why we think there's a clear reason that we're here and where we're going, that it's all contained in one place. And we like to talk about the evidence. And this week, I mean, I've been reading two books. I picked up two books. This one really, I've been getting a big kick out of this one. It's called There Is a God, and No is crossed out. So it was There Is No God, which was this guy's position for most of his life. He's 86 now. He was considered the foremost atheist in academia in the world, up until he made that statement that there is a God. And he has been arguing philosophically. He's a trained philosopher. And he's taught in universities throughout England. He sat in C.S. Lewis's Socrates Club. For those of you who don't know who C.S. Lewis is, he was just a famous Christian. He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia and Mere Christianity. And he had the most popular radio program in wartime England after he'd converted from atheism, agnostic atheism, to becoming a Christian. This guy, Anthony Flew, is the son of he said his dad was the most famous Methodist minister in England. But he became an atheist while he was in college and has retained that position, has debated for it, but in 2003, he started to shift his thinking because of a lot of the stuff we've been presenting on this program. We've talked so much about DNA and the code, and that it's an informative, a language code that has to be interpreted and understood within the cell, and it's all about interpretation of language and intelligence, and that what's converted his thinking is the what we've discovered in science in the last 20 years or so. And over the years, his thinking's been moving in that direction. And now he's come out with the fact that he's convinced there has to be a God, just as he was convinced for a while. He says he was wrong. His philosophy was wrong. He talks about Bertrand Russell in here and mentions him briefly and talks about how he messed up in different places with his reasoning. And I found out reading this book that Bertrand Russell's daughter, Catherine Tate's her name, she became a Christian. He was, of course, a big atheist, Bertrand Russell, trying to prove that, talk about that there is no God as a philosopher, too. Very weak in his arguments, according to Anthony Flew. And I saw that 2 years ago. I mean, the guy had hardly read the New Testament. He made mistake after mistake, Bertrand Russell, in discussing it. But he hated the idea, and his daughter said she could never really talk to him about God because he'd met some Christians along the way he couldn't stand. So he'd rejected Christianity because of that. And man, a lot of you may be sitting with the same thinking, some pretty obnoxious Christians. Some of you might look at us that way. Sorry, we don't mean to offend, but all of our personalities can be abrasive at times because we believe the Bible's correct in calling us all fallen human beings that do things wrong, say things wrong. We're obnoxious sometimes. We're not right on,
None of us are righteous. No, not one. I think about the one reason Jesus said people don't reject him is we put our faith in other people. And you can't base your faith on anything other than him and him alone. And if you're going to base your Christianity on other Christians, you won't be able to believe. That's what Jesus said. So
either way, you got to look for the evidence. Like Anthony Flew, he said, we've got to go. He said he's stuck to this premise throughout his life. Let's follow the argument wherever it leads. And he said the argument in science has led conclusively in his mind to the fact that there's an intelligent agent behind the universe.
And we can camp in that coding information in DNA for a long time in breaking down the complexity.
Oh, and we have.
Yeah, and that alone is probably one of the most powerful evidences scientifically.
He says the same thing. And
then, but spiritually, we have the prophetic word. And I don't know why people don't want to look into that part of, because Jesus said, you know, you didn't believe Moses, you're not going to believe me. Moses spoke of me. Well, Moses was around 1,500 years before the Lord. And he spoke, gave exact prophecies. The prophets gave exact prophecies. Why wouldn't someone want to look into that? Because that is really heavy evidence in the spiritual side of things.
Well, I didn't want to look into it. You didn't want to look into it because we wanted to do things that we knew God would not approve of. And also, we both wanted to be approved by our friends and our families.
How can you believe you who receive honor one from another?
Exactly.
And not the honor that comes from only God. And it was when we decided on our own, in our own heart, to seek out the truth and in the fullness of that truth, that then we started seeing the revealed word.
Right. You should seek me and find me, search me with all your heart. But let's go jump back to him. I want to share some things about him for a second. Anthony Flew. And he mentions in this book, now his viewpoints have changed because of the viewpoints of these scientists. Men, you know, whose names you may not have heard of, like Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, if you're into science. But, I mean, the top, you know, Isaac Newton, Michael Faraday, Robert Boyle, those guys in the past. But Einstein, more in the present. Einstein said God does not play dice with the cosmos. In this book, he takes Richard Dawkins to task. Now, Dawkins, of course, has come out with a couple of books denying that there's a God, taking the same atheist position that Anthony Flew, the head of the academia atheists for many decades, and now he's become a traitor to Dawkins and company in their atheistic viewpoints. But he points out that Dawkins is wrong in many cases in his arguments, weak in his arguments, vindictive, and that shows a vitriolic hatred towards people who have faith. And then he says that Dawkins is dishonest, because Dawkins in his book says that Einstein was somewhere between an atheist and a panentheist, and Einstein himself said, I'm not an atheist. And Flew points out that Dawkins quotes from a book that he quotes from as well, a new biography on Einstein by a good friend of Einstein's called his name is Max Jammer. And this book came out in 1999. It's a biography of Albert Einstein about Einstein, his science, and his theology, and lots of things that people would be unaware of that weren't friends of his. And the fact that, yes, he believed that absolutely there was a God, but not a personal God. But Jammer points out that he didn't understand the full concept of deism, and Einstein says Spinoza's God is my God. Spinoza was a deist scientist also, that deist being that there's a God, he set everything in motion, but he's not a personal God. He doesn't get involved with our personal lives. Now, interestingly, on our website, which is up there, back in 1977, I wrote this little pamphlet in which I talk about Einstein's views, some quotes of his, and Darwin's, and a bunch of other scientists. And Einstein said a lot of things about God, even about Jesus, saying that, you know, man's problems are moral problems. They can't be resolved by science. They can only be resolved morally. And that either the Old Testament, the stuff that Moses gave, would resolve all of our moral problems, or what Jesus said, that would resolve all of our moral problems as well. And he said that no one ever spoke as divinely as this man Jesus, but he never became a Christian. He refused to believe that God would be a personal God, yet he was so inconsistent in his views, because he would say things like, in the shower, God gave me ideas about God. Well, if he's not a personal God interjecting into our lives, well, what is he doing giving you those ideas? And you know, I'd love to ask Einstein that. Maybe it's answered in this autobiography. I haven't read that one. When I wrote this pamphlet back in '77, I read two or three biographies and Albert Einstein's autobiography, gleaning what he was talking about, you know, when he spoke about religion, some other stuff as well.